The Kansas wind carried dust and desperation that morning in October 1887. It whipped through the skeletal town of Ashford Crossing, rattling loose boards and carrying the smell of dying livestock from the railroad yards. The town was bleeding out slow, half the storefronts boarded up, the hotel operating on 2 floors instead of 4, the bank conducting business behind barred windows after 3 robberies in as many months. Evelyn Whitaker stood on a wooden platform in the town square and felt the splinters digging through her worn boots. She kept her spine straight even though her legs wanted to give out. 15 years old, and she was trying to hold together something that was already broken. "Lot 47, the auctioneer announced, his voice gravelly from a lifetime of selling things people shouldn't sell. 4 females, ages 6, 9, 13, and 15. Orphaned this past spring. Healthy stock. Good for housework, farm labor, whatever purpose suits the buyer." Evelyn's hands tightened on her sister's shoulders. Clara pressed against her right side, Ruth against her left. Little May stood in front of them all, barely tall enough to see over the platform's edge, her small fist clutching Evelyn's skirt. "Don't let go," May whispered. Her voice was so small it almost disappeared in the wind. "Never," Evelyn said. The word came out harder than she meant it to, almost angry. She was angry. She was terrified and furious and trying not to let either one show, because the moment these men saw weakness, they'd tear her sisters apart like wolves on wounded deer. Their uncle stood off to the side, swaying slightly, reeking of whiskey even from 15 feet away. Bernard Whitaker had shown up at their door 6 months after the fever took their parents, wearing a stained suit and carrying legal papers that gave him custody. He'd sold their house within a week, sold their furniture, sold their mother's wedding ring and their father's watch, gambled it all away at poker tables from Topeka to Dodge City. Now he was selling them. "Starting bid, $10 for the lot," the auctioneer called out. The crowd shifted. Maybe 40 people scattered across the square, most of them looking anywhere but at the platform. Women clutched their shawls tighter. Men studied their boots. Everyone knew what was happening. Nobody was going to stop it. 12, someone shouted from the back. Evelyn couldn't see who. 15, came another voice. Clara's fingernails dug into Evelyn's palm. Clara was 13, dark-haired like their mother, and before the fever she used to play piano at church socials. She hadn't touched a piano in over a year. She hadn't spoken much either, not since Uncle Bernard started drinking heavier and his hands got rougher. $18, a third bidder called out. Ruth, 9 years old with wire-rimmed glasses that were 2 sizes too big, did what she always did when she was scared. She started counting. Evelyn could hear her sister muttering numbers under her breath, working through some calculation only Ruth understood. The girl was brilliant, could work figures faster than grown men with university degrees. Their father used to joke that Ruth would probably end up running the railroad someday. Now she was livestock. $20 for just the older 2, a new voice suggested. Don't need the little ones. Evelyn's stomach dropped. She spun toward the voice and saw Edgar Pruitt, the feed store owner, a man with tobacco-stained teeth and a reputation for hiring young girls who always quit within months, though nobody ever asked why. "No," Evelyn said loudly. "We stay together." "Lots sold as the seller sees fit," the auctioneer replied without looking at her. "Do we have 20 for the pair?" "You can't," Evelyn started. "Shut up, girl," Uncle Bernard slurred from the side. "You don't get a say. Should be grateful anyone wants you at all." May started crying, not loud. She'd learned not to cry loud around their uncle, but her small shoulders shook and tears tracked through the dust on her face. May was 6 years old and still had nightmares about watching their mother die. She woke up screaming most nights. 25 for all 4, someone else offered. "But I'm only buying if they're unspoiled goods." Clara made a sound like she'd been punched. Evelyn pulled her closer, trying to shield her, trying to be a wall between her sisters and these men who looked at children and saw property, saw labor, saw things Evelyn didn't want to think about. "Can verify 3 of them," the auctioneer said. "Oldest one's been to town enough. Decent reputation, far as I know." Evelyn wanted to vomit. They were talking about them like horses, checking their teeth next, probably. She looked out at the crowd again, searching for anyone who might help. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house stood near the back, crying quietly into a handkerchief. Thomas Yates, the young schoolteacher, stared at the ground with his jaw clenched. The deputy leaned against a post, arms crossed, watching everything with dead eyes. Nobody was going to help. Nobody ever helped. $30, Pruitt called out again. Final offer. Just the two older ones. You can keep the brats. The lot stays together, Uncle Bernard shouted back, suddenly animated by the prospect of more money. I ain't splitting them up for less than 40. They ain't worth 40. Then don't bid. The auctioneer looked annoyed. Gentlemen, let's keep this moving. Do I have 35 for all four? Silence stretched out. The wind picked up, rattling the platform. Evelyn felt May's entire body shaking against her legs. Ruth had stopped counting. Claire's breathing had gone shallow and fast. This was it. This was the moment. In about 30 seconds, the auctioneer would drop his price, someone would bid, and the hammer would fall. The law said their uncle could do this. The law said children without parents belonged to whoever the court said they belonged to, and if that person wanted to sell them off, well, there were ways to make it legal. Indenture contracts, labor agreements, foster arrangements that were really just slavery with paperwork. The law protected men like Uncle Bernard. It didn't protect girls like them. 30, someone finally said, but I want to inspect them first. No, Evelyn said again, louder this time. She could hear the desperation creeping into her voice and hated it. We're not animals. You can't. Girl, I will have the deputy drag you off that platform if you don't shut your mouth, the auctioneer snapped. Your uncle's got legal right to sell your contracts. You don't like it, take it up with the judge after you've worked off what you owe. We don't owe anything, Evelyn's voice cracked. Our father left us money. Uncle Bernard stole it. That's a lie, Bernard shouted, lurching forward. You calling me a thief? Ungrateful little... 35, another voice interrupted. All four, cash in hand. Evelyn's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The bidding was accelerating now. More men were interested once they smelled a deal. She could see them calculating. 4 girls, years of labor, how much work they could extract before the girls were old enough to run. If they ever got old enough. If they survived. Hold on now, Pruitt said. $40. Final offer. All 4 girls. I'll take them today. Evelyn looked at him. Really looked. Saw the way his eyes moved across them. Saw the slight smile pulling at his mouth. She'd heard stories about the girls who worked at his store. Stories people whispered about, but never said out loud. She made a decision. I'll kill you, she said clearly. First chance I get. If you buy us, I will wait until you're asleep, and I'll kill you. The square went completely silent. Pruitt's face turned purple. You hear that? You all heard that? She just threatened... 45. A new voice cut through the chaos. Deep, rough, completely calm. Every head turned. A man stood near the edge of the crowd, one hand resting on his horse's neck. Tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a dusty trail coat and a hat that had seen better years. His face was weathered and hard, marked by a scar that ran along his left jaw. He looked like he'd spent decades in the sun and wind and didn't give a damn what anyone thought about it. Evelyn had never seen him before. I'm sorry, the auctioneer said, squinting. You bidding? Said 45. You need me to repeat it? That's a lot of money for 4 human beings? The man's voice carried an edge now. Yeah, figured it might be. Uncle Bernard stumbled forward, eyes lighting up. You want all 4? Excellent. See, they're fine girls, real hard-working, and I wasn't talking to you, the man said without looking at him. Bernard stopped mid-sentence, confused. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Well, current bid is $45 for the lot. Do I hear 50? Pruitt was staring at the stranger with undisguised hostility. Who the hell are you? Nobody you need to know. I asked you a question, and I don't answer to you. The man's hand moved slightly, and Evelyn noticed for the first time that he wore a gun belt, old military style, the kind men wore when they knew how to use it. Pruitt's face got redder, but he didn't push it. Nobody pushed it. There was something about the stranger that made men reconsider. $50, Pruitt finally said, forcing the words out. And that's more than these girls are worth. 60, the stranger replied immediately. A ripple went through the crowd. That was real money. More than most families in Ashford Crossing saw in 3 months. You're insane, Pruitt said. What do you even want with 4? 70. You haven't even 80. The auctioneer looked like he might faint. Sir, Mr. Mercer, Caleb Mercer. Mr. Mercer, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but perhaps you'd like to inspect the... No. No? I don't need to inspect them. They're children, not cattle. $80. You taking the bid or not? Uncle Bernard was practically dancing now. 80? Yes, that's more than fair. Extremely fair. Evelyn couldn't breathe. She didn't understand what was happening. Nobody spent that kind of money on orphans. Nobody. Which meant this man wanted something specific, something bad. Had to be. Men didn't just show up and... 90, Pruitt snarled. He'd gone past reason now, into pure ego. And I'll inspect them proper before I pay. Caleb Mercer turned to look at Pruitt for the first time. Really look at him. The feed store owner actually took a step back. No, Mercer said quietly. You won't. The hell You lay one finger on those girls and I'll break your arm. Then I'll break your jaw. Then I'll tie you to your own wagon and drag you to the county sheriff to explain why you think you can buy children like livestock. His voice never rose above conversational, which somehow made it worse. I wasn't asking if I could inspect them. I was telling you I won't. Big difference. The deputy pushed off from his post. Now hold on. You want to arrest me for preventing child exploitation, deputy? Because I'm happy to have that conversation. Real happy. We can talk about how you stood here and watched this whole thing happen. Watch those girls get sold off like property. Bet the newspapers would be interested in that story. The deputy's mouth worked silently for a moment, then he stepped back. Pruitt looked around for support. Found none. Everyone was suddenly very interested in the ground again. $100, Mercer said, turning back to the auctioneer. Final offer. You take it now, or I ride out and send a telegram to every newspaper between here and Chicago describing exactly what I saw today. Your choice. The auctioneer looked at Uncle Bernard. Bernard looked at the money. Whatever dregs of family loyalty might have existed died right there. Sold, Bernard said quickly. Sold for $100. The auctioneer brought the hammer down. The sound cracked across the square like a gunshot. Evelyn's knees buckled. Clara caught her. They stood there, holding each other, while their uncle counted cash with shaking hands, and the crowd started to disperse, everyone suddenly in a hurry to be somewhere else. Caleb Mercer tied his horse to a post and walked toward the platform. Up close, he looked older than Evelyn first thought. Maybe late 30s, maybe older. Hard to tell with men who lived outdoors. His eyes were gray-blue, cold as winter sky. Names, he said when he reached them. Evelyn pulled herself together. Evelyn Whitaker. These are my sisters, Clara, Ruth, and May. He nodded once, looked at each girl briefly, then away, like he couldn't quite stand to look at them too long. Get your things, we're leaving. Our things are... Evelyn trailed off. They didn't have things. Uncle Bernard had sold everything except the clothes on their backs. Mercer seemed to understand. He turned to Bernard, who was still counting money. They have any belongings? Nope. What you see is what you get. Any paperwork? Birth certificates? Medical records? Lost in a fire, Bernard said without looking up. Evelyn knew it was a lie. He'd probably sold those too, or used them for collateral on another bad bet. Mercer stared at Bernard for a long moment. You know what you are? Bernard looked up, confused by the question. You're what's wrong with this country, Mercer said flatly. Men like you. Taking what's good and breaking it for pocket change, he paused. If I ever see you again, I'll forget I'm trying to be civilized. Understand? Bernard's face went pale under his alcoholic flush. He nodded once, jerky. Mercer turned back to the girls. Can you ride? I can, Evelyn said. Clara, too. Ruth and May haven't... They'll learn. Come on. He started walking toward his horse. Evelyn looked at her sisters. They looked back at her, terrified, confused, waiting for her to tell them what to do. She had no idea what to do, but standing here wasn't an option. Come on, she whispered, and they followed. Mercer was already mounted, adjusting his saddle. He reached down. Oldest first. You'll ride with me. The others can double up on the spare. Evelyn hesitated. Every instinct screamed danger. She didn't know this man, didn't know what he wanted. But she looked back at the town square, at Pruitt still standing there watching them with hungry eyes, at the deputy who'd done nothing, at the whole rotten system that had put them on that platform in the first place. She grabbed Mercer's hand. His grip was solid, calloused, completely impersonal. He pulled her up behind him like she weighed nothing. Clara and Ruth climbed onto the other horse with surprising ease. They'd ridden their father's old mare before the fever took everything. May needed help, and Evelyn was about to dismount when Mercer simply reached over and lifted the 6-year-old onto the saddle like she was made of paper. "Hold on to your sisters," he told Clara. "It's a 2-hour ride. We'll stop if anyone needs to rest." "Where are we going?" Evelyn asked. "My ranch, Twin Pines, about 12 miles northwest." "What do you want with us?" He didn't answer right away, just clicked his tongue and the horses started moving. They walked through Ashford Crossing slow, and Evelyn could feel every eye on them, could feel the judgment, the speculation, the gossip already starting. Once they cleared the town and hit the open trail, Mercer finally spoke. "Don't want anything with you," he said. His voice was rough, tired. Saw what was happening, couldn't walk away from it. "People walk away from things all the time." "Yeah, they do. So why didn't you?" Another long pause. The horses' hooves crunched against the dry ground. The wind carried the smell of sage and distance. "Had a daughter once," Mercer finally said. "About your age and a son. Younger. They died, long time ago. Was thinking about them when I rode into town this morning. Thinking about how nobody was there to protect them when they needed it." He shifted in the saddle. "Then I saw you 4 on that platform, and I thought, not again, not on my watch." Evelyn didn't know what to say to that. "So what happens now?" she asked instead. "Now you work. Ranch doesn't run itself. You'll earn your keep, proper wages, not slavery. You'll have your own rooms. Madam Lynn runs the household. She's strict but fair. You follow the rules, work hard, stay honest. You'll be treated like human beings. And if we want to leave?" He glanced back at her briefly. "Then you leave. I paid for your freedom, not your imprisonment, but you're minors. Law says you need a guardian until you're 18, so if you run towards something, not just away. Understand?" She didn't believe him, couldn't afford to. Men didn't spend $100 and expect nothing back, but she nodded anyway. They rode in silence after that. The land opened up around them, rolling prairie dotted with dying grass and the occasional twisted tree. The sky was enormous out here, pressing down with its impossible blue. Evelyn could see storms building on the far horizon, dark clouds gathering like bad intentions. Behind her, May had stopped crying. Clara was singing something under her breath, too quiet to hear. Ruth was counting again, probably measuring distance by the horse's stride. And Evelyn held on and tried not to think about what would happen when they reached whatever waited at the end of this trail. They saw the ranch buildings about an hour later. 2 large barns, a stable, several smaller outbuildings, and a main house that looked solid but worn. Everything was painted dark red, the color of rust or old blood. Fences stretched out in careful lines. Evelyn could see cattle grazing in distant pastures, and closer in, horses moved in a corral. It looked normal, working ranch normal. Not the prison she'd been expecting. "That's home," Mercer said. He didn't sound happy or sad about it, just stating fact. As they rode closer, a woman emerged from the main house. Small, probably in her 50s, wearing dark, practical clothing and an expression that could stop bullets. She stood on the porch with her arms crossed, watching them approach with sharp black eyes that missed nothing. "Madam Lynn," Mercer called out. "Got 4 new hands, need rooms prepared." The woman's expression didn't change. "You brought children." "Yeah." "You went to buy cattle." "Change of plans." Madam Lynn looked at the girls for a long moment. Then she sighed, the sound heavy with 30 years of dealing with complicated men making complicated decisions. "Of course you did," she muttered. "Inside, all of you. They look half-starved." Mercer dismounted, then helped May down. The little girl immediately ran to Evelyn, who'd gotten down on her own. Clara and Ruth slid off the other horse with practiced ease. "Take the horses," Mercer told someone Evelyn hadn't noticed, a young ranch hand standing by the barn door. Then he turned to the girls. "Follow Madam Lynn. Do what she says. I'll be in later." He walked away without looking back toward the barn. His shoulders set like a man carrying weight he'd never asked for. Madame Lin made a clicking sound with her tongue. Well, you heard him. Inside. She turned and walked into the house. The sisters looked at each other, an entire conversation happening in silence. Then Evelyn took May's hand and they followed. The inside of the house was clean but sparse. Wooden floors worn smooth by years of boots. Practical furniture. A fireplace that looked like it got used hard in winter. Everything was neat, organized, almost military in its precision. You're filthy, Madame Lin said, studying them with clinical efficiency. When did you last bathe? 3 days ago, Evelyn said. Uncle Bernard he didn't care much about that. I see. And before him? Our parents died in March. Fever. Madame Lin's expression softened slightly. Only slightly. I'm sorry for your loss, but being orphaned doesn't mean being neglected. You'll bathe daily here. Clean clothes, clean bodies. Understand? All 4 girls nodded. Good. This way. She led them upstairs. The house was bigger than it looked from outside. 3 rooms on the 2nd floor. Madame Lin pushed open the first door. 2 beds. You'll share for now. If Mr. Mercer decides you're staying permanently, we'll make other arrangements. It was a simple room. 2 narrow beds with wool blankets, a dresser, a window looking out toward the western pastures. But it was clean and it had a door that closed and nobody was trying to sell them. The other room is mine, Madame Lin continued, pointing. Mr. Mercer sleeps downstairs. There are ranch hands in the bunkhouse, but they don't come in the main house without permission. The washroom is at the end of the hall. Meals are at 6, noon, and 6. You're late, you don't eat. You don't show up, I come find you, and you won't like it. Yes, ma'am, Evelyn said automatically. Questions? About 1,000, Evelyn thought, but she shook her head. Then clean up. I'll find you some proper clothes. Your previous clothing needs burning. Madame Lin left. The moment the door closed, May burst into tears. Real tears this time, loud and messy, all the fear finally spilling out now that they were somewhere marginally safe. Clara wrapped her arms around her. Ruth stood frozen, still processing. And Evelyn walked to the window and looked out at the ranch stretching into the distance. She'd promised her father on his deathbed that she'd keep them together, that she'd protect them, that she wouldn't let the world break them. She didn't break that promise today, but she had no idea what tomorrow would bring. They ate dinner in the kitchen. Madame Lin had found them clothes, simple dresses and undergarments that were worn but clean. The food was plain, but there was a lot of it. Bread, stew, vegetables, more food than they'd seen in weeks. Mercer didn't join them. Madame Lin said he was working late in the barn. Evelyn suspected he was avoiding them. You have questions, Madame Lin said. It wasn't a question itself. Why did he buy us? Evelyn asked. You'd have to ask him. He said he had children, that they died. Madame Lin's expression went very still. Yes. What happened? That's his story to tell, not mine. She paused, considering. But I'll tell you this. Mr. Mercer is a hard man, fair but hard. He expects work, expects honesty, expects respect. You give him that, you'll find him reliable. And if we don't, then you'll find out why ranch hands either stay here 10 years or leave within 3 days. Madame Lin stood, collecting their empty plates. Get some sleep. Tomorrow starts at 5. You'll begin learning how this place runs. They climbed the stairs in silence. May fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted. Ruth curled up with her glasses carefully folded on the nightstand. Claire sat on the other bed, staring out the window at the darkening sky. What do you think? She finally whispered. I don't know, Evelyn admitted. Are we safe here? Evelyn wanted to say yes, wanted to believe it, but she'd learned not to trust easy answers. I don't know that either, she said honestly, but we're alive, we're together. That's more than we had this morning. Clara nodded slowly. What did you mean? What you said to that man about killing him? I meant it. Evie, I meant it, Evelyn repeated, harder now. I'd have killed him. I'd have killed anyone who tried to separate us. I'd have done anything. Clara reached over and took her hand. I know. That's what scares me. They sat like that for a long time, holding hands in the dark, listening to May's soft breathing and the wind moving through the prairie grass outside. Somewhere below, Evelyn heard a door close, heard heavy footsteps crossing the floor, heard a man moving through his house like a ghost haunting his own life. She wondered what Caleb Mercer saw when he looked at them. 4 girls he'd saved, or 4 ghosts of the children he'd lost, and she wondered which answer scared her more. 5 o'clock came like a slap. Evelyn jerked awake to the sound of someone pounding on their door. "Up!" Madame Lin's voice cut through the darkness. Work doesn't wait for sleep. Evelyn's body ached in places she'd forgotten existed. The thin mattress had done nothing to cushion the weeks of sleeping on floors and in wagon beds. She pulled herself upright, disoriented for a moment about where she was. Then it all came back. The auction. The stranger. The ranch. Clara, Ruth, May. She shook each sister awake. "Come on." May whimpered, still half asleep. Ruth fumbled for her glasses. Clara sat up looking lost, her dark hair tangled around her face. They dressed in the dim pre-dawn light, pulling on the worn clothes Madame Lin had provided. By the time they stumbled downstairs, the kitchen already smelled like coffee and frying bacon. Madame Lin moved around the space with mechanical efficiency, her movements precise as a drill sergeant's. "Sit," she said without turning around. "Eat fast. Mr. Mercer's already been up 2 hours." The food was good. Better than good after months of Uncle Bernard's neglect. Eggs, bacon, thick slices of bread with butter. Evelyn wanted to eat slowly, to savor it, but Madame Lin's presence made that impossible. Everything about the woman radiated controlled urgency. Caleb Mercer came in just as they were finishing. He looked like he'd been working, dust on his pants, hay in his hair. He grabbed coffee without speaking, drank half the cup standing up, then finally looked at them. "You 4 got any skills besides standing around looking scared?" Evelyn bristled. "I can read and write, do figures. I helped my father with his bookkeeping before." "Good. You'll help me with ranch accounts. What about the others?" Clara opened her mouth, closed it again. Ruth stared at her plate. May just looked tiny and terrified. "They're children," Evelyn said. "They're learning." "Yeah, and they'll learn faster here than anywhere else." He turned to Clara. "You. What's your name again?" "Clara," she whispered. "Speak up. Can't hear you when you mumble." "Clara." Louder this time, with an edge that surprised Evelyn. "Better. You got hands. Can you use them?" I played piano. Before." "Piano." Mercer almost smiled. Almost. "Well, we don't have one of those, but Madame Lin needs help in the house. You'll work with her. Learn cooking, cleaning, mending, real skills." He looked at Ruth. "You're what, 9?" "Yes, sir." "Good at anything?" Ruth hesitated. "Numbers. I'm good at numbers." "How good?" "Very good." Ruth's voice got steadier when she talked about mathematics. "I can multiply 4 digits in my head, do percentages, calculate compound interest." Mercer actually looked interested for the first time. "That right? Madame Lin, test her." Madame Lin turned around, wiping her hands on her apron. 347 times 62. Ruth didn't even pause. 21,514. There was a moment of silence. Madame Lin pulled a pencil and paper from a drawer, worked through it longhand, then looked up with something like respect. "She's correct." "Huh." Mercer studied Ruth like she was a puzzle he hadn't expected to find interesting. "You'll help with inventory counts, feed calculations, supply orders. Think you can handle that?" Ruth nodded, a small smile starting to form. It was the first time Evelyn had seen her sister look anything close to happy in months. "And the little one?" Mercer asked, looking at May. May shrank back against Evelyn's side. "She's 6, Evelyn said sharply. "What do you expect her to, "I didn't ask you." He crouched down, bringing himself to May's eye level. His voice got quieter. "What's your name?" May didn't answer. "It's all right. You don't have to talk if you don't want to." He stayed crouched there, not pushing. "You like animals?" May's eyes flickered toward the window where she could see horses in the distance. "Yeah? We got horses here. Some of them are real mean. Got one named Sergeant that kicks anyone who gets close. Been trying to work with him for months. Maybe you could help." May looked at him, really looked, trying to figure out if this was a trick. No pressure, Mercer said, standing back up. But if you want to, barn's always open. He poured himself more coffee and headed for the door. Evelyn, you're with me after breakfast. Office is off the main room. Rest of you do what Madame Lin says. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a finality that felt like punctuation. Madame Lin clicked her tongue. Well, you heard him. Finish eating, then Clara comes with me. Ruth, you'll start in the supply shed. May... She looked at the small girl thoughtfully. You can help me with the chickens this morning. We'll see about horses later. I don't want to leave Evelyn, May said, her first words all morning. You're not leaving her, you're working. Everyone works here. That's how places like this survive. Madame Lin's voice was firm, but not unkind. Your sister will be 50 feet away in the office. You'll see her at lunch. Now clear these plates. They cleaned up in silence, then split apart for the first time since the auction. Evelyn watched her sisters disappear, Clara following Madame Lin toward the pantry, Ruth heading outside with a clipboard, May trailing behind Madame Lin like a nervous shadow. She'd promised to keep them together. This felt like breaking that promise, even though they were still on the same property. Office, Madame Lin called over her shoulder. Don't make him wait. The office was small, cramped, and buried under paper. Ledgers stacked on every surface, bills pinned to the walls. A massive oak desk covered in what looked like 6 months of disorganized chaos. Caleb Mercer sat behind it, frowning at a letter like it had personally insulted him. Close the door, he said without looking up. Evelyn closed it. You said you can do bookkeeping. That true, or were you just trying to sound useful? It's true. My father ran a supply business. I helped him with accounts receivable, payroll, inventory tracking. Your father teach you double entry? Yes. Accrual versus cash accounting? Both. He finally looked up. How old are you again? 15? 15. He shook his head like the world had stopped making sense. All right, here's the situation. I'm good at ranching, real good, but paperwork makes me want to shoot something. My last bookkeeper quit 3 months ago. Since then, everything's gone to hell. He gestured at the chaos. I need this organized, filed. I need to know what I owe, what I'm owed, what's coming due. Think you can handle that? Evelyn looked at the disaster zone and felt something unexpected, excitement. This was a problem with a solution, a puzzle she knew how to solve. Yes, she said. Don't lie to me. If you can't do it, say so now. I can do it. He studied her for a long moment, then pushed back from the desk. It's yours then. Files are in those cabinets. Should be organized by date, but probably aren't. Current bills are somewhere in that pile. Bank statements are... He looked around vaguely. Somewhere? You need anything? Ask Madame Lin. I'll check your work at the end of the week. What do you want me to focus on first? Whatever keeps us from losing the ranch. He said it matter-of-factly, like that was normal. We're not broke, but we're closer than I'd like. Last 2 years have been rough. Cattle prices dropped. Lost half the spring calves to fever. Banks getting nervous about the mortgage. How nervous? Nervous enough that I get letters twice a week reminding me payments due end of November. 2 months. They had 2 months before the bank could foreclose. How much do you owe? $1,200. Evelyn's stomach dropped. That was a fortune. How much do you have? In cash? Maybe $300. Got cattle I can sell, but market's bad right now. Every rancher in Kansas is desperate, which means buyers can lowball us all. What about receivables? People who owe you money? Some. Nothing huge. He grabbed his hat off a hook. Look, I know this is a mess. That's why you're here. Figure it out. I've got fences to check. He left before she could ask anything else. Evelyn stood in the silent office, surrounded by paper chaos and the weight of impossible math. Caleb Mercer had spent $100 buying them at auction, and now he was telling her the ranch was nearly broke. That math didn't work. Unless he really was insane, or unless he decided 4 lives were worth risking everything for. She didn't know which option scared her more. But she knew one thing: if this ranch went under, they'd all end up back in Ashford Crossing, back at another auction, and next time there wouldn't be an angry stranger to save them. So she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. 3 hours later, Evelyn had learned several things. 1, Caleb Mercer wasn't exaggerating about the chaos. 2, whoever had kept books before her had been either drunk or incompetent. 3, The ranch was in worse shape than Mercer realized. She'd found bills dating back 8 months, unpaid invoices stuffed in drawers, bank statements that didn't match the ledger. It was a disaster, but disasters could be fixed if you broke them into pieces. She was shoulder deep in a filing cabinet when Ruth appeared in the doorway. "Madam Lynn says it's lunch." "Already?" Evelyn looked up, disoriented. Dust covered her hands and her eyes hurt from reading faded handwriting. "It's past noon. You missed the bell." In the kitchen, Clara was setting the table with mechanical precision. May sat in the corner, very quiet, holding something in her lap. Evelyn couldn't see what. "How was it?" Evelyn asked, sitting down. Clara shrugged. "Fine. I peeled 40 potatoes, scrubbed pots. Madam Lynn doesn't talk much." "She told me I have good hands," Ruth offered. "Said my inventory count was more accurate than the last 2 ranch hands combined." "That's great, Ruth. I like it here." Ruth said it carefully, like testing dangerous ground. "Is that wrong? To like it?" "No," Evelyn said, even though her own feelings were a tangled mesh she couldn't sort. "It's not wrong." May didn't say anything, just held whatever was in her lap tighter. Madam Lynn brought out food, soup, bread, cold chicken. They ate quickly. The ranch operated on efficiency, no wasted time. "This afternoon," Madam Lynn said, "Clara continues with me. Ruth, you'll work with Thomas in the supply shed. He'll teach you the inventory system properly." "Who's Thomas?" Evelyn asked. "Head ranch hand. Been here 6 years. Good man. Quiet." Madam Lynn looked at May. "And you're coming to the barn with me." May's head snapped up. "The horses?" "Mr. Mercer said you could try with Sargent. We'll see if you got any gift for it." For the first time since the auction, May looked almost eager. After lunch, Evelyn returned to the office. She worked through the afternoon, building spreadsheets in her head, organizing chaos into columns. By evening, she had a rough picture of the ranch's finances. It wasn't good. Caleb Mercer came back at sunset, covered in dirt and dried sweat. He dropped into the chair across from the desk and looked at her with exhausted eyes. "Well, you owe more than you told me," Evelyn said. "Counting everything, mortgage, supplier bills, equipment repairs, it's closer to 1,800. He closed his eyes. "Wonderful. But your receivables are better than you thought. You've got almost $500 in outstanding payments people haven't collected." "I made a list." She pushed a paper across the desk. "If you push these people to pay, can't push them. They're neighbors. Some are friends. Then you need to sell cattle sooner, even at bad prices. I sell now. I won't have enough breeding stock for next spring. That kills the ranch long term. Keeping the stock kills it short term if the bank forecloses." They stared at each other across the desk. Outside, someone was calling instructions about securing the barn. A horse whinnied. Normal ranch sounds. "You're 15, Mercer finally said. "You shouldn't understand finances this well. My father said money doesn't care how old you are. Either you understand it or it destroys you." "Smart man, your father." "He died poor." "So did mine." Mercer rubbed his face. "All right, you're right. We need to sell some cattle. I'll talk to buyers this week, see what I can get. Anything else?" "Yes. You spent $100 buying us. That's money you didn't have." "I know. So why did you do it?" He was quiet for a long time, long enough that Evelyn thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he spoke, slow and careful, like he was pulling words from somewhere deep and painful. "I told you I had children. Daughter named Sarah, son named Michael, 8 and 6 when they died." He stared at the wall behind her, seeing something else. "I was away fighting in the war. Border conflicts, Kansas-Missouri violence. Thought I was protecting something. Came back and found raiders had hit the ranch, killed my wife, killed both kids. House was still burning when I rode up." Evelyn couldn't breathe. "I spent 10 years after that not caring about much. Rebuilt the ranch because I didn't know what else to do. Worked until I couldn't think. Figured I'd just exist until I stopped existing." He finally looked at her. "Then yesterday morning I rode into town thinking about them. Thinking about how nobody protected them. And I saw you 4 on that platform and it was like I got a second chance at something. I know that doesn't make sense. You're not my kids. You're not anyone's kids now. But I couldn't walk away. Brahms all bought this. Even though you can't afford us. Even though." That's insane. Yeah, he almost smiled. Probably is. We could leave. Find somewhere else. Relieve you of the burden. You could. He stood up, stretched his back. But you won't, because you're smart enough to know there is nowhere else. Not for 4 orphan girls with no parents and a drunk uncle who'd sell them again the moment you showed up anywhere official. He headed for the door, then paused. You don't have to trust me, but you're here. You're safe. And I'm not letting anyone take that away. Not the bank, not the government, not anyone. After he left, Evelyn sat in the darkening office and tried to sort through everything she felt. Fear, confusion. Something that might have been hope if she let herself believe in it. She didn't believe in it, couldn't afford to. But for the first time in months, she thought maybe they'd survive until tomorrow. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Life at Twin Pines developed a rhythm that felt almost normal. Wake at 5, work until dark, eat meals at exact times, sleep hard and dreamless from exhaustion. Evelyn learned the ranch finances inside and out. She set up a proper accounting system, organized all the files, started tracking every penny. Caleb checked her work twice and found nothing wrong. After that, he just left it to her, which meant she had real responsibility for the first time in her life. Clara learned to cook, clean, and manage a household. Madam Lynn was hard on her but fair, teaching her skills their mother had started teaching before the fever took her. Clara still didn't talk much, but she stopped flinching at every unexpected sound. Ruth turned out to be a mathematical genius. She could calculate feed ratios faster than 3 grown men combined, could predict weather patterns by tracking barometric pressure and temperature changes. Thomas, the head ranch hand, started consulting her on supply orders, and May found the horses. The first time Evelyn saw her sister in the barn, she barely recognized her. May stood in a stall with Sargent, the massive gelding that kicked 3 men in 2 weeks, and the horse was calm. May's small hand rested on his neck, and she was whispering something too quiet to hear. She's got a gift, Madam Lynn said from behind Evelyn. I've seen it before. Some people just understand animals, speak their language. She's 6 years old. Age doesn't matter with gifts like that. May spent every free moment in the barn. The horses responded to her in ways they didn't respond to anyone else. Within a week, Sargent stopped kicking. Within 2 weeks, he'd follow May around like a devoted dog. Caleb noticed but didn't comment. He just adjusted assignments, giving May more time with the horses and less time on other chores. They were settling in, building something. Evelyn didn't want to think about what that meant. Then Uncle Bernard showed up. It was late afternoon, almost evening. Evelyn was in the office finishing accounts when she heard shouting outside. She looked out the window and saw a wagon rolling up the drive. Bernard Whitaker stumbled off it, drunk as always, with 2 other men beside him. One wore a deputy's badge. Her blood went cold. She ran outside. Caleb was already there, standing between Bernard and the house. Madam Lynn had appeared on the porch, and Evelyn could see Clara pulling May behind her. You got no right, Bernard was shouting, pointing at Caleb with a shaking finger. No right to take them. They're family. Family you sold, Caleb said flatly. That was a legal transaction. Proper indenture contracts. Funny, I don't remember signing any contracts. You just took money and ran. The deputy stepped forward. He was older than the one from the auction, with gray in his mustache and tired eyes. Mr. Mercer, I'm Deputy Carson from the county. Mr. Whitaker has filed a complaint claiming you intimidated him into surrendering his nieces under false pretenses. That's horseshit. Nevertheless, I'm required to investigate. Then investigate. But you're not taking these girls anywhere. Sir, if there's evidence of wrongdoing... Evidence? Caleb's voice got dangerous. You want evidence? There were 40 witnesses who watched this drunk bastard sell 4 children in a public auction. That's your evidence. I was within my legal rights, Bernard protested. I'm their guardian. I can enter them into labor contracts. Not anymore, you can't. Caleb pulled a paper from his pocket. Had a lawyer draw this up last week. Official guardianship transfer, filed with the county clerk. I'm their legal guardian now. Bernard's face went purple. You can't. That's not. It's done. You got your money. You got drunk and gambled it away, I'd guess. Now you want them back so you can sell them again. Caleb's hand moved toward his gun belt. Not happening. The deputy looked uncomfortable. Mr. Whitaker, did you sell these girls at auction? It was legal. That's not what I asked. Bernard sputtered. I had debts. They needed to work. That's how things are done. Not anymore. The deputy's voice got hard. Mr. Mercer, I'll need to verify this guardianship paperwork, but if it's legitimate, there's no case here. It's legitimate. Then we're done. The deputy turned to Bernard. You're done here too. Get back in that wagon. This isn't over, Bernard shouted. I'll go to the state. I'll file charges. You'll leave, the deputy said. Now, before I arrest you for public intoxication. Bernard tried to argue more, but the other man grabbed his arm and hauled him back toward the wagon. They rolled away, Bernard still shouting threats that got lost in the dust. The deputy stayed behind. He looked at Caleb for a long moment. Guardianship papers real? He asked quietly. Real enough. That'll hold maybe 3 months. Then someone with real authority will come asking questions. State inspectors, social welfare people. They'll want to know why a single man is keeping 4 orphan girls on an isolated ranch. I'm running a legitimate business. They're working for wages. They're children. Who'd be back on an auction block or in some workhouse if I hadn't stepped in? Caleb's jaw was set. You got a problem with that? The deputy sighed. No, but others will. I'd get yourself a real lawyer, document everything, make it harder for them to take the girls away. Already doing that. Good. The deputy mounted his horse. For what it's worth. I think what you're doing is right, but right doesn't always matter when the law gets involved. He rode away, leaving silence behind. Evelyn walked up beside Caleb. What did he mean? 3 months? Means your uncle isn't the only problem. State might decide I'm not fit to be guardian, might send inspectors to remove you all. And put us where? Orphanage, workhouse, wherever they put unwanted children. Clara had come down from the porch, May still holding her hand. We don't want to go. I know. So what do we do? Caleb looked at all 4 of them, at Evelyn with dirt under her fingernails from organizing his office, at Ruth holding her eternal clipboard, at Clara who'd learned to make bread from scratch, at May who'd tamed his meanest horse. We fight, he said simply. We document everything. Show the ranch is successful. Show you're healthy, educated, properly cared for. Make it impossible for them to justify taking you. And if they try anyway? Evelyn asked. His hand touched his gun belt again. Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the deputy's words. 3 months, maybe less. She'd started to think they were safe here, but safety was apparently just another temporary illusion. She got up and went downstairs, found Caleb sitting in the main room, papers spread across the table, working by lamplight. Can't sleep either? He asked without looking up. No, understandable. He gestured at the papers, trying to figure out legal options. Not many good ones. Evelyn sat down across from him. Why are you doing this? Really? You told me about your children, but this is bigger than grief. This could destroy everything you've built. He set down his pen. You want the truth? Yes. I'm tired, he said. Tired of watching bad things happen and doing nothing. I did nothing during the war when it mattered. Came home and found nothing left to protect. Spent 10 years being angry at everyone except the one person I should have been angry at, myself. He looked at her directly. Then I saw you 4 on that platform and I thought, here's a chance. One chance to actually do something right. Maybe I'm selfish for taking it. Maybe I'm using you to fix something broken in me, but it's still better than the alternative. Which is what? Letting the world keep being cruel and pretending that's normal. Evelyn understood that. She'd felt that anger on the auction block. Felt it every day of her life since their parents died. The world was cruel and nobody did anything about it because doing something was hard and dangerous and might cost you everything. We could run, she said quietly, take May and Ruth and Clara and just disappear. Head west. Change our names. You could try. Probably wouldn't make it 3 days before someone caught you. But we could try. Yeah. He gathered up his papers. Or you could stay. Let me fight for you. Let all of us build something here that's worth protecting. I don't know how to trust that. Then don't trust it. Just stay anyway. See what happens. He stood up, headed for his room, then paused. Your father would be proud of you. The way you take care of your sisters. The work you do. He'd be real proud. After he left, Evelyn sat in the dark and let herself cry for the first time since the auction. Quiet tears that didn't wake anyone, mourning everything they'd lost and everything they might lose still. But she didn't run. The next morning, she got up at 5 and went back to work. The lawyer arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Deputy Carson's warning. Evelyn was in the office reconciling feed costs when she heard the wagon pull up. She looked out to see a thin man in a good suit climbing down, carrying a leather case that probably cost more than everything the Whitaker sisters owned combined. Caleb met him at the door. Their voices carried through the window. Mr. Mercer, I'm Harold Gaines, State Inspector for Child Welfare Services. I'm here to conduct an evaluation of the minors currently residing on your property. Didn't know I needed an appointment for that. You don't. That's rather the point. Gaines had a clipped way of talking, each word precise and dismissive. May I come in? Do I have a choice? Not really, no. Evelyn's hands went cold. She stood up, smoothed her dress, tried to look composed. This was it. The thing Deputy Carson warned them about. She hurried out of the office and found Madame Lynn already gathering Clara, Ruth, and May in the kitchen. Stay calm, Madame Lynn said quietly. Answer questions honestly. Don't volunteer information. Understand? All 4 girls nodded. Gaines entered with Caleb behind him, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. The inspector surveyed the kitchen with sharp eyes, taking in every detail. His gaze lingered on the girls. These are the Whitaker sisters? He asked, pulling out a notebook. They are, Caleb said. Names and ages? Evelyn, 15. Clara, 13. Ruth, 9. May, 6. Gaines wrote everything down with quick, efficient strokes. And you claim guardianship over all 4? Not claiming. Have it. Legal papers filed with the county. Yes, I've seen those papers. Rather hastily drawn up, weren't they? Almost like you were trying to establish legitimacy after the fact. Gaines walked closer to the girls. Tell me, children, are you here voluntarily? Evelyn spoke before anyone else could. We're here because Mr. Mercer bought us at an auction where our uncle was selling us to strangers. If you're asking whether we'd rather be here or back with men who wanted to buy children for labor and worse, then yes, we're here voluntarily. Gaines's eyebrow went up. You have quite the mouth on you. I have quite the memory too. Should I describe exactly what happened that day? The men bidding, what they said? That won't be necessary. He turned to Caleb. I need to inspect their living quarters, their work conditions. Interview each child separately. You can inspect whatever you want, but you're not separating them. They stay together. Mr. Mercer, I'm a state official conducting a legal. I don't care if you're the president conducting a parade. Those girls have been through enough trauma. You want to talk to them, you do it where they can see each other. Gaines's mouth thinned. Very well. Let's start with the living arrangements. They went upstairs. Evelyn watched Gaines examine their room with growing anxiety. He checked the beds, opened drawers, looked out the window. Everything was clean, organized, proper. Madame Lynn had made sure of that. Adequate, he finally said, writing more notes, though housing 4 minors in one room is hardly ideal. It's what they wanted, Caleb said. Offered them separate rooms. They chose to stay together. Yes, well, what children want and what's best for them are often different things. Gaines moved back downstairs. Now, let's discuss their labor. What work do these girls perform? Evelyn handles ranch bookkeeping and accounts. Clara assists with household management and cooking. Ruth helps with inventory and supply calculations. May works with the horses. And they're compensated for this labor? Room, board, education, and wages deposited monthly into accounts I set up for each of them. That got Gaines's attention. You're paying them? Why wouldn't I? They work, they get paid. That's how employment works. Most guardians don't pay their wards. Most guardians didn't buy their wards at an auction. Caleb's voice had gone flat. You want to see the books? Evelyn can show you every penny that comes in and goes out of this ranch, including what goes to them. Gaines looked at Evelyn. Is this true? You handle the ranch finances? Yes, sir. You're 15 years old. Yes, sir. And Mr. Mercer trusts you with this responsibility? He checks my work. But yes, he trusts me. Gaines studied her for a long moment, then Ruth. And you? What exactly do you calculate? Ruth pushed her glasses up. Feed ratios for optimal cattle growth, supply ordering to minimize cost while maintaining quality, weather pattern predictions for planting and harvest schedules, compound interest on loans, depreciation schedules for equipment. I see. More notes. And the youngest one works with horses? May didn't answer, just pressed closer to Evelyn. She has a gift, Madame Lynn said. Animals respond to her. She's already gentled 3 horses no one else could handle. A 6-year-old working with dangerous animals seems irresponsible. A 6-year-old sold at auction seems criminal, Caleb shot back. But here we are. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Gaines closed his notebook with a decisive snap. Mr. Mercer, I'll be frank with you. Your arrangement here is highly irregular. A single man housing 4 orphaned girls on an isolated ranch raises numerous concerns. Questions of propriety. Questions of safety. Questions of exploitation. Exploitation? Caleb's voice got dangerous. You want to talk about exploitation? Let's talk about the legal system that let their uncles sell them. Let's talk about the state orphanages where children die from neglect and abuse. Let's talk about the workhouses that use kids as slave labor. That's exploitation. That's not... Yeah, it is. You know it is. Everyone knows it. But it's legal, so nobody does anything about it. Caleb stepped closer. These girls are fed, clothed, educated, and treated like human beings. They sleep in clean beds. They're learning real skills. They're safe. You tell me how that's worse than the alternatives. Gaines was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer but no less firm. I'm not saying your intentions are bad, Mr. Mercer, but intentions don't matter if the situation is inappropriate. I have to file a report with the state. That report will likely recommend the girls be removed to proper institutional care. No. The word came from Clara, surprising everyone. She'd been silent through the whole inspection, but now she looked at Gaines with something fierce in her eyes. We're not going anywhere. Young lady, you don't... My parents died. Our uncle sold us. We stood on a platform while men bid on us like cattle. Clara's voice shook, but didn't break. Mr. Mercer saved us. He gave us a home. You want to take that away and put us in some institution where we'll be just more mouths to feed and bodies to work? No, we're staying here. The law let us be sold, Clara was almost shouting now. The law did nothing while we were auctioned off. Don't talk to me about what the law says we should do. Evelyn grabbed Clara's hand, squeezed it. Her sister was shaking. Gaines looked uncomfortable for the first time since arriving. I understand you're upset. You don't understand anything, Ruth said quietly. You came here looking for problems, looking for reasons to separate us. But you won't find any. Mr. Mercer hasn't hurt us, hasn't touched us, hasn't done anything except give us work and dignity and a chance to be something other than victims. That may be true, but there's no but, Evelyn interrupted. Either we're being mistreated or we're not. If we're not, then leave us alone. Gaines closed his case. I'll file my report. The state will make a determination within 2 weeks. Until then, you'll remain here. But I suggest you prepare for the possibility that you'll be relocated. He left without another word. They watched through the window as his wagon rolled away, dust trailing behind it like a bad omen. Nobody spoke for a long minute. Then Caleb said very quietly, he's going to recommend removal. Can we fight it? Evelyn asked. In court? Maybe. If we had a good lawyer. Good lawyers cost money we don't have. Then we get the money. How? Evelyn thought fast. The cattle. Sell them now, take whatever price you can get. Use that money to hire a lawyer, file an appeal. That kills the ranch long term. The ranch doesn't matter if we're not here. Caleb looked at her, then at each of her sisters. At Clara still shaking with anger. At Ruth clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. At May silent and scared. Something shifted in his face, some final wall coming down. All right, he said, we fight. The next week was chaos. Caleb sold half his cattle at prices that made him wince, pulling together every dollar he could. He hired Marcus Webb, a lawyer from Topeka with a reputation for taking impossible cases. Webb was expensive, sharp, and didn't sugarcoat anything. The state's going to argue you're an unfit guardian, Webb said, sitting in the ranch office surrounded by papers. Single man, isolated property, no female supervision beyond the housekeeper. They'll paint you as either a predator or dangerously negligent. I'm neither. Doesn't matter what you are. Matters what they can make a judge think you are. Webb looked at Evelyn. You said you keep detailed records? Every transaction, every wage payment, every expense? Good. We'll need all of it. We need to show this ranch operates like a legitimate business where the girls are employees, not prisoners. We need testimony from neighbors, other ranchers, anyone who can vouch for Mercer's character. Most folks around here don't like getting involved, Caleb said. Then we convince them to get involved. Because if we lose this hearing, these girls go to state custody. And from what I understand, state custody in Kansas is basically a death sentence. Webb wasn't exaggerating. Over the next few days, Evelyn learned exactly what happened to orphans in state institutions. Overcrowding, disease, abuse. Children worked 18 hours a day in factories or farms. Many didn't survive past 16. The ones who did came out broken. The hearing was set for October 28th in the county courthouse. They had 12 days to prepare. Webb drilled them on testimony. What to say, how to say it, what questions to expect. He was brutal, asking things that made Clara cry, and Ruth shut down completely. But he was thorough. They're going to try to break you, he warned. Going to suggest Mr. Mercer has done inappropriate things, that you're lying to protect him, that you don't know what's good for you. You have to stay calm. Answer honestly. Don't get angry. What if they separate us? May asked. First words she'd spoken in 2 days. Webb looked at her for a long moment. Then we appeal. And we keep appealing until we win or run out of options. That's not very comforting, Evelyn said. It's not meant to be comforting. It's meant to be honest. On October 27th, the night before the hearing, Evelyn couldn't sleep again. She found Caleb in the barn, checking on the horses. He looked exhausted, older than he had a month ago. You should be resting, she said. Could say the same to you. I'm too scared to rest. He didn't tell her not to be scared, didn't offer empty reassurances, just nodded. Yeah, me too. What happens if we lose? We don't lose. But what if we do? Caleb was quiet for a long time, running his hand along Sargent's neck. The horse had calmed considerably under May's influence, but he still got nervous around most people. Around Caleb, he was merely tolerant. If we lose, Caleb finally said, I'll fight anyway. I'll take you 4 and we'll disappear. Head west to California or north to Canada. Change our names. Start over. That's illegal. So is selling children at auctions, but that didn't stop your uncle. You'd really do that? Risk everything? He looked at her directly. Evelyn, I've already risked everything. Lost it once before. Maybe I'll lose it again, but I'm not letting them take you 4 without a fight. That's a promise. Promises don't mean much. My father promised we'd be okay. I'm not your father, and I'm not making that kind of promise. I'm promising I'll fight, that's all. Can't promise we'll win. It was more honest than anything anyone had told her in months. She appreciated that. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For being angry enough to care. Morning came too fast. They dressed in their best clothes, which wasn't much, but Madame Lynn had cleaned and pressed everything. They rode to town in the wagon, silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The courthouse was packed. Evelyn hadn't expected that. She'd thought this would be a quiet hearing, just lawyers and a judge. Instead, half the county seemed to have shown up. Townspeople she recognized from the auction, ranchers, shopkeepers, even some of the men who'd bid on them. Webb saw her looking. Word got out. Some folks are curious, some are supportive, some... He trailed off, but Evelyn understood. Some wanted to watch them lose. Inside, the courtroom was old wood and high ceilings. Judge Morrison sat behind the bench, an elderly man with white hair and eyes that had seen too much. The state's attorney was a woman named Patricia Simmons, young and determined, the kind of person who believed completely in their own righteousness. All rise, the bailiff called. The hearing began. Simmons went first, laying out the state's case with clinical precision. Single man, 4 orphaned girls, irregular guardianship arrangement, potential for exploitation. She made it sound sinister, made Caleb sound dangerous, made the whole situation seem obviously wrong. Then she called her first witness, Harold Gaines. The inspector took the stand and described his visit. He was careful, professional, but his implications were clear. The arrangement was questionable. The girls seemed coached. There were concerns about safety and propriety. In your professional opinion, Simmons asked, are these children best served remaining in Mr. Mercer's custody? No, Gaines said. I believe they would be better served in a structured institutional environment with proper supervision and education. Webb stood for cross-examination. Mr. Gaines, in your inspection, did you find evidence of physical abuse? No, but sexual abuse? Not directly, but the potential evidence of neglect, malnutrition, unsafe conditions? The conditions were adequate, but so you found no evidence of actual harm, just potential for harm based on your personal assessment of what's proper. Gaines's jaw tightened. The arrangement is highly irregular. Irregular isn't illegal. Did you find anything illegal in that household? The girls were working for wages. Documented wages deposited in individual accounts. Is it illegal to employ minors in a family business? No, but then what crime has Mr. Mercer committed? Simmons objected. Webb withdrew the question, but the point was made. Next, Simmons called several townspeople who testified about Caleb's character. Most said he was a loner, kept to himself, had a reputation for violence during the war. It painted a picture of a dangerous man who shouldn't be trusted with children. Then Webb started calling his witnesses. Thomas, the head ranch hand, testified first. I've worked for Caleb Mercer 6 years. He's fair, honest, and decent. Those girls? They're treated better than most hired help I've seen. They're learning real skills. They're safe. Anyone saying different hasn't spent 5 minutes on that ranch. Several neighbors testified. All said the same thing. Caleb was a good man. Hard, but good. The ranch was well run. The girls seemed healthy and cared for. Then Webb called Madam Lynn. She walked to the stand with the same no-nonsense attitude she brought to everything. When asked about conditions at the ranch, she didn't sugarcoat. The girls work hard. Mr. Mercer expects discipline, but they're fed well, clothed properly, educated daily. I teach them household management, mathematics, reading. Clara is learning advanced cooking. Ruth is learning bookkeeping and engineering principles. May is learning animal husbandry. And you see no issues with 4 young girls living with a single man? Simmons asked on cross-examination. I see issues with 4 young girls being sold at auction, Madam Lynn replied coldly. I see issues with a state that allows that but questions the man who stopped it. You want to talk about propriety? Let's talk about the auction first. Simmons looked like she'd been slapped. That's not... It's exactly the point. These girls had nowhere to go. No one wanted them. Mr. Mercer gave them a home. Now you want to take it away and put them in some institution where they'll be just another number, another body to exploit. You want to talk about what's best for children? Start with not destroying the only stable thing they've had in months. Judge Morrison called for order. Madam Lynn sat down, unapologetic. Webb looked at Caleb. Last chance. You sure you want them to testify? It's their choice. Webb turned to Evelyn. You want to do this? She looked at her sisters. Clara nodded. Ruth gripped her hand. Even May, small and scared, gave a tiny nod. Yes, Evelyn said. We do. Webb called Evelyn first. She walked to the stand on shaking legs, took the oath, sat down. The entire courtroom stared at her. Tell us what happened the day of the auction, Webb said. So she did. Every detail. Standing on the platform, the men bidding, their uncle counting money, the fear that they'd be separated. She didn't cry, didn't let her voice shake, just spoke plainly about the worst day of her life. And when Mr. Mercer bid on you, what did you think? I thought he was dangerous, thought he wanted something terrible, because men don't spend that kind of money without wanting something back. And has he proven that fear correct? No. He's given us work, shelter, wages, and dignity. He's taught us we're worth more than what someone will pay for us. She looked directly at Judge Morrison. The state wants to take us away from that. Put us somewhere proper. But proper means an institution where children are forgotten, where we'd be worked to death or worse. Mr. Mercer saved us once. Now he's trying to save us again. And the law is trying to stop him. Simmons stood for cross-examination. Miss Whitaker, isn't it true that Mr. Mercer has isolated you, kept you from other children, from town, from normal social interaction? We work on a ranch. There aren't other children. Don't you think that's unhealthy, that you should be with peers your own age? I think being sold was unhealthy. This is just different. Has Mr. Mercer ever touched you inappropriately? No. Has he ever made you uncomfortable? He saved our lives. If that makes me uncomfortable, it's because I'm not used to people doing good things without wanting something in return. Simmons tried several more angles, but Evelyn held firm. Finally, she was dismissed. Clara went next. She testified about learning to cook, about Madame Lin's strict but fair teaching, about feeling safe for the first time since their parents died. When Simmons tried to suggest Caleb had ulterior motives, Clara's response was simple and devastating. He's never even hugged us, never touched us, except to help us onto horses or move furniture. He barely looks at us for more than a few seconds because I think it hurts him, because we remind him of his dead children. If you think he saved us for any reason other than he couldn't stand to watch us be destroyed, then you don't understand him at all. Ruth testified about her work, about feeling valued for her mind instead of just her labor. She brought charts and calculations, showing the ranch's improved efficiency since she'd started helping with supply management. She spoke with the precision of someone much older, and several people in the courtroom looked genuinely impressed. When it was May's turn, everyone expected disaster. She was 6, small, terrified of strangers. She climbed onto the witness stand barely tall enough to see over it. Webb kept his questions simple. May, do you like living at the ranch? She nodded. Can you tell us why? She was quiet for so long everyone thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, voice barely above a whisper. The horses were scared, like me. Nobody could help them, but Mr. Mercer let me try, and they got better, and I got better too. She looked at the judge. He lets broken things heal. That's good. There wasn't a sound in the courtroom. Simmons didn't even try to cross-examine. What could she say to that? Finally, Webb called Caleb. He walked to the stand looking like he'd rather face a firing squad, took the oath, sat down. Mr. Mercer, why did you buy these girls? Because it was wrong. What was happening was wrong, and everyone was just watching. You could have reported it to authorities. The authorities were there, deputies stood by and watched. Nobody was stopping it. So you took it upon yourself? Someone had to. Even though you couldn't afford it? Even though it risked your ranch? Yeah. Why? Caleb was quiet for a moment. I failed to protect my own children. Wasn't there when they needed me. These 4 needed someone. I was there. Maybe it doesn't make sense. Maybe it's selfish, but I couldn't walk away. Are you expecting anything from these girls in return? Work? Honesty, basic respect. Same thing I expect from anyone. Nothing else? Nothing else. Simmons stood. Mr. Mercer, you're asking this court to believe you spent $100 out of pure altruism? I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm telling you what happened. You expect us to believe you have no ulterior motives? I expect you to look at those 4 girls and tell me they'd be better off in your custody than mine. Look at them and say that honestly. Simmons did look. Evelyn saw the hesitation. For just a moment, the attorney's certainty wavered. This isn't about emotion, Simmons finally said. It's about law, about proper procedure, about ensuring children are in appropriate environments. Those are just words, Caleb said flatly. Empty words people use when they're too afraid to do what's right. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. That's enough, both of you. He looked at the clock. It's late. I'll review the testimony and evidence tonight. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning for my decision. Court adjourned. They filed out in silence. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Evelyn felt hollow, wrung out. They'd done everything they could, said everything that needed saying. Now it was out of their hands. Webb pulled Caleb aside. They talked in low voices while the girls waited by the wagon. Evelyn could guess what was being said. Webb preparing them for the possibility of loss, discussing appeals, discussing options. What do you think will happen? Ruth asked quietly. I don't know, Evelyn admitted. He seemed to listen, the judge. Listening and deciding are different things. Clara climbed into the wagon. We should run, tonight. Just take the horses and go. Webb said that would make things worse. Prove the state right about Caleb being unfit. I don't care what Webb said. I care about staying together. May didn't say anything, just held Evelyn's hand tight enough to hurt. They rode back to the ranch in darkness. Nobody wanted dinner. They all went upstairs and sat together in their room, not talking, just being close. Around midnight, Evelyn heard Caleb moving around downstairs. She went down and found him at the kitchen table, a bottle of whiskey and a glass in front of him. "You drinking?" she asked. "Thinking about it. That help?" "No, but sometimes feeling worse is easier than feeling this." She sat down across from him. "Webb thinks we'll lose. Webb's paid to think of worst-case scenarios." "Do you think we'll lose?" Caleb poured a small amount into the glass, stared at it, didn't drink. "I think the system is designed to protect itself, not kids. I think judges rule based on precedent and procedure, not on what's right. And I think the state would rather put you four in an institution where they can forget about you than leave you with me where they have to think about what happened. So we lose. Probably." He pushed the glass away. "But we fight anyway, because that's all we've got." Morning came gray and cold. They dressed without speaking, ate without tasting, rode to town like they were heading to an execution. The courthouse was even more packed than the day before. Word had spread about the testimony, about May's statement, about the whole impossible situation. Judge Morrison entered. They all stood. He sat down, looked at papers in front of him for what felt like an hour, then finally spoke. "I've reviewed all testimony and evidence presented in this matter. This is an unusual case with no clear precedent. The state argues for adherence to established procedure. Mr. Mercer argues for pragmatic reality. Both have valid points." Evelyn's heart was hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. "However," Morrison continued, "after careful consideration, I find that the Whitaker sisters are currently in a safe, stable environment where they are being adequately cared for and educated. While the arrangement is unorthodox, I see no evidence of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. Mr. Mercer's guardianship will stand." The courtroom exploded, people shouting, some in anger, some in support. Morrison banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order! This is not a complete victory for either side. Mr. Mercer, you will submit to quarterly inspections by the state. You will ensure the girls receive formal education, either through a tutor or by attending school when possible. You will maintain detailed records of their care and development. Any evidence of impropriety will result in immediate removal. Understood?" "Yes, Your Honor. Miss Simmons, the state may appeal this decision, but I suggest you choose your battles carefully. These girls are better off than 90% of orphans in Kansas, and we both know it. Court adjourned." He left before anyone could respond. Evelyn sat frozen, unable to process what just happened. They won. They actually won. Clara grabbed her, crying. Ruth was shaking. May buried her face in Evelyn's dress. And Caleb stood there looking like he'd been punched, like he couldn't quite believe it either. Webb clapped him on the shoulder. "Congratulations. Now comes the hard part, proving to the state you deserve this." But Evelyn barely heard him. They were safe. For now. They could stay together. They had time to build something real. It wasn't perfect. The fight wasn't over. But for today, it was enough. Outside, people crowded around them. Some to congratulate, some to whisper gossip, some just to stare. Evelyn saw Edgar Pruitt standing at the edge of the crowd, his face twisted with barely controlled rage. Saw Deputy Carson nodding approval. Saw townspeople who'd watched the auction now pretending they'd supported them all along. And she saw Thomas and the other ranch hands waiting by the wagon, ready to take them home. Home. The word felt foreign, dangerous to believe in. But as they climbed into the wagon and rolled out of town, Evelyn let herself think it anyway. Maybe home wasn't a place. Maybe it was just people who refused to give up on you. People angry enough at the world's cruelty to do something about it. That night, for the first time since her parents died, Evelyn slept without nightmares. The newspaper arrived 3 days after the hearing. Thomas brought it up from town, his face unreadable as he handed it to Caleb during the midday meal. "You're going to want to see this," he said. The headline sprawled across the front page of the Kansas City Star. "Rancher saves 4 sisters from auction block. Court rules in favor of unconventional guardian." Evelyn read over Caleb's shoulder. The article described the hearing in detail, quoted testimony, painted Caleb as either a hero or a madman, depending on which paragraph you read. But what made her stomach drop was the final section. The case raises troubling questions about Kansas's handling of orphan children. Sources confirm that similar auctions have occurred in at least 6 other counties, with children as young as 4 being sold into indentured servitude. Local officials declined to comment, but critics argue the practice amounts to legalized child trafficking. They made it news, Ruth said quietly. She'd been reading too, standing on her toes to see the paper. National news, Caleb corrected, pointing to the masthead. This goes to every major city from here to New York. Is that bad? Clara asked. Don't know yet. They found out the next morning when 2 more wagons rolled up the drive. The first carried a reporter from the Topeka capital, a young man with ink-stained fingers and too many questions. The second brought a woman from something called the Children's Protection League, a reform organization Evelyn had never heard of. The reporter's name was Daniel Price. He sat up at the kitchen table and pulled out a notebook that looked like it had survived a war. Mr. Mercer, the public wants to know, why did you do it? What made you spend a fortune you didn't have on 4 strangers? Caleb looked like he'd rather be breaking horses. Already answered that in court. The court transcript says you couldn't walk away, but that's not a complete answer. Men walk away from injustice every day. What made you different? Nothing made me different. Maybe that's the problem. Price wrote that down. Can you elaborate? I'm not different. I'm just tired of pretending that's how things have to be. Tired of watching bad things happen and calling it normal. The woman from the Children's Protection League introduced herself as Margaret Stowe. She was in her 50s, wore a traveling suit that had seen better days, and had eyes that looked like they'd witnessed every cruelty humanity could devise. I'm not here to inspect you, she said immediately. I'm here because what happened to these girls is happening everywhere. We've documented over 300 cases of children being sold, traded, or indentured across 5 states. But we can't get anyone to care. Then your case hits the papers and suddenly people are paying attention. So you want to use us, Evelyn said. It came out harder than she meant it to. Stowe didn't flinch. Yes, I want to use your story to save other children. Is that acceptable to you? Evelyn looked at Caleb. He looked back at her, leaving the choice in her hands. What would it involve? Evelyn asked. Testimony, speaking engagements, putting faces to statistics. People ignore numbers. They can't ignore you 4 standing in front of them describing what happened. We already testified once. It was... Claire's voice cracked. It was hard. I know, and I won't force you. But understand this. Right now, in Kansas alone, there are probably 50 children in situations as bad or worse than yours was. Next month, there will be more. The month after, more still. Someone has to make people see, make them angry enough to demand change. Ruth pushed her glasses up. What kind of change? Laws. Real laws with teeth. Making it illegal to sell children under any circumstances. Requiring state oversight of orphanages. Creating alternatives to institutional care. It's a long fight, years probably, but it starts with making people understand the problem exists. And if we say no, Evelyn asked, then I'll find other children to speak. Other families to highlight. Your case put a crack in the wall, but it won't bring the wall down by itself. Price was scribbling furiously. Miss Whitaker, if I may, you're 15 years old and you handle the finances for a working ranch. That's remarkable. How did that happen? My father taught me. Then he died and I had to learn fast. And your sisters, one works with horses, one with advanced mathematics, one with household management. All while most girls your age are learning needlework and piano. We learned what we needed to survive, Evelyn said flatly. That's not remarkable. That's just what happens when you don't have choices. Price looked at her for a long moment, then wrote something that took up half a page. Over the next week, more reporters came, more reform advocates, more letters from across the country, some supportive, some vicious. People who thought Caleb was a saint, people who thought he was a predator, people who wanted to help, people who wanted to see them destroyed. The ranch became a spectacle. Wagons rolling up at all hours, strangers asking invasive questions. It disrupted work, disrupted routine, disrupted the fragile peace they'd built. Finally, after a particularly aggressive reporter tried to interview May without permission, Caleb snapped. "Everyone out," he said, voice cutting through the chaos in the yard. "Now! Mr. Mercer, I just need 5 more minutes. You need to leave, all of you. This is private property. You're trespassing. The public has a right to... The public has a right to nothing. These are children, not circus attractions. You want a story? Story's over. Go write it somewhere else. Price, who'd been more respectful than most, held up his hands. What if we schedule something formal? Controlled environment. One interview on your terms, then we back off? Caleb looked at Evelyn. Again, the choice was hers. One interview, she said. All 4 of us together. You print exactly what we say, no creative editing, and then you leave us alone. Deal. They held the interview 2 days later in town, at the courthouse where it had all happened. Margaret Stowe was there, along with Price and 2 other reporters who'd agreed to pool their coverage. The girls wore their best dresses. Caleb stood in the back, arms crossed, looking like he was about to start shooting if anyone stepped out of line. Price asked the questions everyone wanted answered. What was the auction like? What happened at the ranch? How did they feel about Caleb? What did they want people to know? Evelyn spoke first, describing the auction without emotion, just facts. The platform, the bidding, the fear. Then she looked directly at the reporters. People want to know why Mr. Mercer saved us. Wrong question. Question should be why everyone else watched and did nothing. 40 people saw what was happening. 40 people knew it was wrong. 1 person acted. That's not a story about him being special. That's a story about everyone else being cowards. The room went very quiet. Clara spoke next. They're going to call this a miracle. Call Mr. Mercer a hero. Make it sound like everything worked out. But it's not a miracle. It's just one man who got angry at the right moment. And there are hundreds of children who won't get that moment, who will be sold and broken and forgotten. That's not a miracle story. That's a horror story that keeps happening. Ruth stood up, holding papers she'd prepared. I've calculated the numbers. Based on county records and population data, approximately 800 children per year in Kansas alone are sold into indentured servitude through legal mechanisms. Multiply that across all states, you're looking at 10,000 annually. That's not a few bad cases. That's systematic exploitation with legal protection. She spread the papers on the table, charts, graphs, projections. The reporters stared at them like they were looking at evidence of a crime. May didn't speak. Stowe had told them she didn't have to. But when Price asked if she wanted to say anything, she stood up and walked to the window where you could see horses tied outside. They hurt horses and then sell them when they're broken, May said, so quietly everyone had to lean forward to hear. Then someone has to fix them, make them trust again, but nobody wants to do that work. It's hard and it takes time, and sometimes they never get fixed all the way. She turned around. Kids are the same, but nobody even tries to fix kids. They just hurt them more. Price's hand was shaking as he wrote. The interviews ran in newspapers across the country. Within a week, Evelyn started receiving letters. Some were from other orphans, describing situations that made her want to vomit. Some were from families offering support. Some were from politicians claiming they'd been fighting this battle for years. Lies, mostly, from people who suddenly wanted credit for caring. But a few letters stood out. One from a woman in Boston who ran a private orphanage focused on education rather than labor. One from a businessman in Chicago who wanted to fund legal challenges to indenture laws. One from a former slave who wrote that he recognized the auction description because it sounded exactly like what happened to his family before the war. This is getting bigger than us, Caleb said one night, sorting through the stack of correspondence. Bigger than I meant it to get. You saved 4 girls, Madam Lynn replied. You don't get to control what happens after that. I don't want to control it. I just want them to be able to live normal lives. Normal lives? Evelyn almost laughed. We stood on an auction block. We testified in court. We're in newspapers from New York to California. Nothing about our lives is going to be normal. Then what do you want? It was a real question. Caleb asking, not deciding. Evelyn thought about it. About the letters from children who needed help. About the system that kept feeding kids into machines that destroyed them. About being 15 years old and suddenly having a platform she never asked for. I want to make it mean something, she finally said. What happened to us? I want it to count for more than just us surviving. That's a big responsibility. We already have a big responsibility. We're the ones who got away. If we stay quiet, we're just lucky. If we speak up, maybe we're useful. Clara nodded slowly. Ruth was already pulling out her charts, annotating them with new data. Even May seemed to understand in her quiet way that something had shifted. Margaret Stowe came back a week later with a proposal. The Children's Protection League wanted to organize a speaking tour, 5 cities, carefully controlled, with security and chaperones. The girls would tell their story. Stowe would present data. Local reform groups would push for legislative action. "It's 2 months," Stowe said. "November and December. You'd be back by Christmas. I can't promise it'll be easy. People will challenge you, some violently. But it might actually change something." 2 months away from the ranch, Caleb said, during winter, when work doesn't stop. "I'll hire extra hands," Stowe offered. "The league has funds. We can pay for temporary labor. This isn't about money. It's about whether they're ready." He looked at Evelyn, always looking at her to decide. "I'm ready," she said, "but only if we all go. All 4 of us. Together." "That's a lot of children to move around." "We stay together. That's not negotiable." Stowe smiled like she'd been hoping for that answer. "Together, then. All 4. I'll make the arrangements." They left Twin Pines in early November. The ranch was buttoned up for winter, extra hands hired, everything organized to run without them. Caleb came with them, refused to let them travel alone, didn't care what it cost. Madam Lynn stayed to manage the property, giving them a look that said they'd better come back alive or she'd kill them herself. The first stop was Topeka. They spoke at the state capitol to an audience of legislators, reformers, and curious citizens. Evelyn described the auction. Ruth presented data. Clara played a piano piece she'd composed, something raw and haunting that left the room in stunned silence. May stood beside Evelyn and didn't speak, but her presence said enough. Afterward, a state senator approached them. "You've made your point. Now what? You can't expect us to overturn decades of legal precedent based on one emotional story." "Why not?" Evelyn asked. "You created decades of precedent based on one lie, that children are property. All we're asking is you fix it." "It's more complicated than that." "It really isn't. Either children can be sold or they can't. Pick one." The senator looked annoyed. "Young lady, you don't understand how government works." "I understand perfectly. You're afraid of making powerful people angry, people who profit from child labor, people who think orphans are cheaper than paying real wages. You're not saying it's complicated because it is. You're saying it because it's easier than doing what's right." The senator walked away. But 3 other legislators stayed to talk. One introduced himself as Marcus Webb's cousin, said Webb had told him about the case, said he'd draft a bill banning the sale of minors in Kansas. It wouldn't pass immediately, he warned. Would take time, multiple sessions, coalition building, but it was a start. From Topeka they went to Kansas City, then St. Louis, then Chicago. Each city brought larger crowds, more press, more pressure. They spoke to wealthy donors who wrote checks but didn't want details. They spoke to former orphans who shared horror stories worse than anything Evelyn had imagined. They spoke to politicians who promised reform and others who called them troublemakers trying to destroy tradition. In Chicago, a man stood up during the presentation and called them frauds, said the whole thing was staged for attention, said Caleb probably orchestrated the auction himself as a publicity stunt. Clara stood up before anyone could stop her. "You want proof? I'll give you proof. I've got scars on my back from where my uncle beat me when I didn't work fast enough. Ruth has a broken finger that healed wrong because nobody bothered to set it. May has nightmares every night where she wakes up screaming because she thinks she's back at the auction. And Evelyn," her voice broke. "Evelyn hasn't cried once since our parents died because she's too busy holding the rest of us together. You want to call us frauds? Come look at the evidence we carry on our bodies and in our heads." The man sat down. Nobody else challenged them after that. By the time they reached Indianapolis, the final stop, Evelyn was exhausted. Not physically, though that too. Emotionally. Telling the story over and over, answering the same questions, defending their existence to people who thought orphans were either pitiable creatures or dangerous parasites. But something was building. She could feel it in newspaper editorials, in church sermons, in conversations happening in parlors and saloons across the country. People were getting angry. Not at them. At the system that created their situation. The Indianapolis presentation was held in a massive hall that seated 500. It was packed. Standing room only. Evelyn stood backstage with her sisters, listening to the crowd noise, feeling sick. "I don't know if I can do this again," she admitted. Then don't, Caleb said. He'd been quiet through most of the tour, staying in the background, letting them lead. We can stop. Go home. You've done enough. It won't be enough until it changes. Might never change. World's stubborn that way. Then we keep pushing until it does. Clara squeezed her hand. Ruth straightened her glasses. May just stood close, her small presence steadying. They walked out together. The crowd went quiet. Evelyn stepped to the podium and looked out at 500 faces, some sympathetic, some skeptical, some just curious. My name is Evelyn Whitaker, she began. I'm 15 years old. 5 months ago, my sisters and I were sold at a public auction in Kansas. She told the story one more time, but this time something felt different. Maybe it was the exhaustion making her raw. Maybe it was the cumulative weight of 2 months telling this story. Whatever it was, she stopped performing and just spoke. Honestly, angrily. People keep asking why Mr. Mercer saved us, like he's some special person with special qualities. He's not. He's just a rancher who got angry at the right moment. The real question is why nobody else did. Why 40 people watched and did nothing. Why the law allowed it. Why the state tried to take us away from the one person who protected us. She gripped the podium. You want to know what's wrong with this country? It's not that bad things happen. It's that everyone knows they're happening and looks away. It's that we've built systems to make cruelty legal so nobody has to feel guilty about it. It's that children can be bought and sold and worked to death and people call it tradition. Her voice rose. I'm 15. My sisters are 13, 9, and 6. We shouldn't have to stand here begging adults to do the right thing. You should have done it already. But you didn't. So here we are, telling you what you already know, that selling children is wrong, that the orphan system is broken, that something has to change. She stopped, breathing hard. The hall was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Within seconds, the entire crowd was on their feet, applause rolling through the space like thunder. Evelyn didn't feel triumphant, just tired. But maybe tired was enough. Maybe tired and angry was all it took to start changing things. After Indianapolis, they went home. Twin Pines looked smaller than Evelyn remembered. Or maybe she'd just grown used to big cities and crowds. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, ordinary. It was the best thing she'd seen in months. Madam Lynn met them at the door. You're thinner, all of you. I'll fix that. Inside. They ate like they'd been starving. Maybe they had been. Not for food. Stowe had made sure they were fed. But for something familiar. Something that felt like home. That night, Caleb gathered them in the main room. Tour's over. League got what they wanted. Question is, what you want now? What do you mean? Ruth asked. Mean you could go back to normal, work the ranch, live quietly, let other people fight the battles. You've done your part. Evelyn looked at her sisters. They'd talked about this on the train back. Had argued about it, actually. Clara wanted to stop, wanted to return to the peace they'd found at Twin Pines. Ruth wanted to continue, thought they could do more. May didn't say what she wanted, but Evelyn could guess. She wanted her family to stop hurting. The League wants us to testify before Congress, Evelyn finally said. Next spring, national reform legislation. Margaret says if we speak, it might actually pass. Congress, Caleb repeated. Washington. Yes, that's a long way from here. I know. Could take months. Could take years. I know that too. He studied her. What do you want, Evelyn? Not what the League wants. Not what you think you should do. What do you want? She'd been asking herself that question for weeks. The answer scared her because it meant choosing a path she could never undo. I want to make them pay, she said quietly. Everyone who watched and did nothing. Every system that let it happen. I want to stand in front of Congress and make them so uncomfortable they have to act. I want them to see us and know they failed. And then I want them to fix it so no other child has to stand on an auction block ever again. That's a lot of anger. Good. I'm angry. We should all be angry. Caleb nodded slowly. All right. Then we go to Washington, but this time we do it right. Get proper representation. Build coalitions. Make sure when you speak, people have to listen. You'll come with us? Somebody has to keep you alive. Ruth cleared her throat. I've been working on something. Data compilation across all documented cases. If we present it right, we can show patterns. Prove this isn't isolated incidents, but systematic abuse. I can compose something, Clara added. Something specifically for Congress. More formal than what I've been playing. May just nodded. Whatever they decided, she'd follow. Margaret Stowe arrived 3 days later with a plan. The Children's Protection League had been building toward this moment for years, she explained. Multiple reform organizations were ready to push coordinated legislation, but they needed faces, stories. The Whitaker sisters had become those faces. It won't be easy, Stowe warned. Congress is hostile to reform. Child labor is profitable. Orphanages are profitable. Indenture is profitable. You'll be fighting people with power and money who want to keep the system exactly as it is. When do we start? Evelyn asked. January. Gives us time to prepare. Build support. Get other families to testify alongside you. By the time spring session starts, we'll have enough pressure that they can't ignore us. They spent December preparing. Ruth compiled data from 16 states. Clara composed a piece she called The Auction. 7 minutes of music that somehow captured everything they'd experienced. Evelyn worked with Webb, who'd signed on as their legal advisor, learning how to present testimony that would survive cross-examination. May worked with the horses. It was her way of processing everything. The ranch had taken on 2 new rescues, horses so damaged nobody else would buy them. May spent hours in the barn, coaxing them back to something like trust. Christmas came. They celebrated quietly. First Christmas as a family, though nobody said that out loud. Madam Lynn cooked a feast. Caleb gave them each small gifts he'd clearly agonized over. Evelyn got a leather-bound journal for keeping accounts. Clara got sheet music from a Kansas City store. Ruth got a surveyor's compass. May got a book about veterinary medicine written for adults, but that she immediately started reading anyway. They gave Caleb the only thing they had, a photograph. They'd taken it in Chicago, all 5 of them together. Caleb stared at it for a long time, then carefully placed it on the mantel without speaking. On New Year's Eve, Evelyn stood outside looking at stars and thinking about everything that had happened. 1 year ago, her parents were alive. 6 months ago, they were on an auction block. Now they were preparing to testify before Congress. She heard footsteps behind her, Caleb carrying 2 cups of coffee. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Too much thinking. Yeah, I know that feeling. He handed her a cup. You sure about Washington? Not too late to back out. I'm sure. You're 16 now. Old enough to start making real decisions about your life. If you want something different, education, different work, different anything, say so. What I want is to finish what we started. What if it doesn't work? What if Congress does nothing and all this was for nothing? Then at least we tried. At least we made them look at what they were ignoring. She sipped the coffee. You taught us that, the day at the auction. You could have walked away, could have said it wasn't your problem, but you didn't. I was angry. Good. Anger gets things done. He smiled slightly. Your father would be proud of you. Hell, I'm proud of you. All 4 of you. We couldn't have done it without you. Yeah, you could have. Maybe not the same way, but you'd have survived. You're survivors. He looked up at the stars. My kids, Sarah and Michael, they never got the chance to be what you 4 are becoming. Never got to be angry at injustice or fight for something that mattered. They just died. But watching you 4, it's like, I don't know, like they get a second chance through you. That probably doesn't make sense. It makes sense, Evelyn said quietly. They stood in silence, drinking coffee, watching stars, preparing for whatever came next. In January, they left for Washington. Washington in January was nothing like Kansas. The city sprawled gray and imposing, full of stone buildings that looked like they'd been designed to make people feel small. Evelyn stood outside the Capitol building and felt exactly that. Small, insignificant, like a girl from nowhere trying to move a mountain. Big place, Clara said beside her. Too big, Ruth muttered. She'd been quiet since they arrived, overwhelmed by crowds and noise and the sheer weight of what they were about to attempt. May held Evelyn's hand tight. She hadn't spoken in 2 days. The travel, the strangers, the pressure. It was breaking her down. Evelyn could see it happening and didn't know how to stop it. We don't have to do this, Caleb said for the 10th time. We can go home right now. Nobody would blame you. Everyone would blame us, Evelyn replied. We'd blame ourselves. Margaret Stowe came hurrying up the Capitol steps, breathless. They've moved up the hearing. It's today, 2 hours from now. Today? Evelyn's stomach dropped. You said we had 3 days to prepare. Opposition pushed for an earlier date. They think we're not ready. Probably hoping you'll stumble. Stowe looked at them seriously. Are you ready? No, Evelyn thought. We're 4 girls from Kansas who barely survived the last year. We're not ready to take on Congress. But she said, yes. They spent the next 2 hours in a preparation room, going over testimony with Webb and Stowe. What to emphasize, what to avoid, how to handle hostile questioning. Webb was blunt about their chances. They're going to try to discredit you, call you emotional, suggest you're being manipulated by reform groups. Some will question whether the auction even happened. Stay calm, stick to facts, don't let them make you angry. What if I already am angry? Evelyn asked. Then use it, but control it. Anger that's controlled is powerful. Anger that explodes gets dismissed. When they finally walked into the hearing chamber, Evelyn felt like she might vomit. The room was massive, high ceilings, rows of seats filled with congressmen who looked bored or hostile or both. At the front sat the committee chairman, an elderly man named Senator Blackwood, who had a reputation for blocking reform legislation. They took their seats at the witness table. Caleb sat behind them with Webb. Stowe sat with other reformers in the gallery. The room was packed with observers, journalists, curious citizens. Evelyn recognized some faces from the speaking tour. Others were new, hostile. Blackwood banged his gavel. This hearing will come to order. We're here to consider proposed legislation regarding the treatment of orphan minors. First witnesses are the Whitaker sisters and their guardian, Mr. Caleb Mercer. He looked at them over his spectacles. Miss Whitaker, you're the eldest. You may begin. Evelyn stood. Her legs shook, but she locked her knees and forced herself steady. My name is Evelyn Whitaker. I'm 16 years old. Last October, my sisters and I were sold at a public auction in Ashford Crossing, Kansas. She described it. Every detail. The platform, the bidding, the men's comments, their uncle's drunken greed. Some congressmen shifted uncomfortably. Others looked skeptical. One was openly reading a newspaper. Mr. Mercer bought all 4 of us for $100. He gave us work, shelter, education, and dignity. The state of Kansas tried to remove us from his care. We fought them in court and won. Now we're here because what happened to us is still happening to hundreds of children every month across this country. A congressman interrupted. Miss Whitaker, you claim you were sold at auction. Do you have documentation, bills of sale, official records? No, sir. It wasn't that kind of sale. It was done through indenture contracts, legal on paper, slavery in practice. That's a serious accusation. It's an accurate description. Another congressman leaned forward. And this Mr. Mercer? He's a single man who bought 4 young girls. You don't find that arrangement inappropriate? Evelyn had been expecting this. I find it inappropriate that the law allowed us to be sold in the first place. Mr. Mercer's intervention was the only thing that prevented us from being separated and sent to men who had worse intentions than giving us honest work. Still, the optics. The optics are that a man saw children being exploited and did something about it. If you're more concerned with optics than with the fact that children are being legally trafficked, then you're part of the problem. The room went very quiet. Webb made a small gesture. Careful, don't push too hard. But Evelyn was past careful. Blackwood cleared his throat. Miss Whitaker, this committee takes child welfare seriously, but we must balance protection with established legal frameworks. Indenture has been practiced for centuries. So was slavery, Evelyn said, until it wasn't. A murmur ran through the chamber. Several congressmen looked angry. Others looked thoughtful. Are you comparing indenture to slavery? Someone demanded. I'm saying both involve owning people. Both involve forced labor. Both involve treating human beings as property. You can call it different names, but the reality is the same. Ruth stood up, adjusting her glasses. If I may, I've prepared statistical analysis. She pulled out her charts. In 1887 alone, approximately 11,000 children across 16 states were sold into indenture contracts. Mortality rates for indentured children are 40% higher than general population. Average working hours exceed 70 per week. Educational access is nearly zero. By every measurable standard, these children are being systematically destroyed. She spread the charts across the table. Numbers, graphs, projections. Hard data that couldn't be dismissed as emotion. A younger congressman studied the charts. Where did you get these numbers? County records, census data, orphanage reports, death certificates? I cross-referenced 17 different sources to ensure accuracy. The numbers are conservative estimates. Reality is probably worse. And you calculated all this yourself? Yes, sir. How old are you? 10. The congressman sat back, looking stunned. Ruth pushed her glasses up and continued. The proposed legislation would accomplish 3 things. First, ban the sale of children through any mechanism, including indenture. Second, establish federal oversight of orphanages and foster situations. Third, create alternatives to institutional care. Cost analysis suggests implementation would actually reduce long-term expenses to states by decreasing mortality and increasing productivity of surviving children who would become functional adults rather than broken laborers. She said it all without emotion, just presenting facts. It was devastating precisely because it was so clinical. Clara stood next. I'm going to play something, she announced. It's called The Auction. I composed it after everything happened. I think it says what words can't. She walked to a piano at the side of the chamber. Stowe had arranged for it to be brought in. Clara sat down, hands hovering over the keys for a moment. Then she began to play. The music started quiet, almost peaceful. Then it grew discordant, harsh, building to something that sounded like terror and rage mixed together. Evelyn could hear the auction in it, the auctioneer's voice, the men bidding, the fear. Then it shifted, becoming something softer, but still sad, still broken. It told the whole story without a single word. When Clara finished, the chamber was absolutely silent. Several people were crying. Even Blackwood looked shaken. Clara walked back to the table and sat down without speaking. May was last. She hadn't prepared anything, hadn't practiced. Everyone assumed she wouldn't testify at all. But she stood up, small and scared, and walked to the front. I don't remember much about the auction, she said, voice barely audible. I remember being scared. I remember thinking we were going to die or get hurt or get separated. I remember men looking at us like we weren't people. She paused. After Mr. Mercer bought us, I still thought we were going to get hurt, because every adult in my life except my parents had hurt me. But he didn't. He just let me work with horses. And the horses were broken like me, and I helped them get better. And they helped me get better. She looked directly at Blackwood. You're going to vote on whether to protect kids like me. I don't think you should have to vote on that. I think it should be obvious. But if you need to vote, then vote like we're real people, like we matter, because we do matter, even if nobody treated us like we did. She walked back to her seat. Evelyn wanted to hug her, but May just sat down, stone-faced, holding everything in. Blackwood looked like he'd aged 10 years. Thank you for your testimony. The committee will now hear from Mr. Mercer. Caleb stood. He looked uncomfortable in a suit, out of place in this grand chamber. He cleared his throat. I'm a rancher. I don't know much about politics or laws, but I know right from wrong, and what happened to these girls was wrong. What's happening to thousands of other children is wrong. You don't need complicated legislation or years of study to figure that out. You just need to decide whether you're going to keep letting it happen or whether you're going to stop it. Mr. Mercer, a congressman said, you spent a fortune you couldn't afford to buy these girls. Some might say that was financially irresponsible. Some might say watching children get sold and doing nothing is morally irresponsible. I'll take financial irresponsibility over that any day. But you put your ranch at risk, put yourself at risk. For strangers. They're not strangers anymore. They're family. Caleb's voice was steady. And maybe that's what this country forgot. We're supposed to be a family, supposed to protect the weakest members. Instead, we built systems to exploit them. You want to talk about risk? How about the risk we're taking as a nation by destroying our own children for profit? That seems smart to you? To another congressman stood. Mr. Mercer, while your sentiment is admirable, the reality is more complex. Orphanages are underfunded. Foster systems are overwhelmed. Indenture provides a solution. Indenture provides profit, Caleb interrupted, for businesses that get cheap labor, for counties that dump children rather than care for them. For everyone except the children themselves. Don't call it a solution. Call it what it is. Exploitation with legal cover. The questioning went on for hours. Hostile congressmen tried to poke holes in their story. Sympathetic ones asked softball questions to let them expand on points. Journalists scribbled notes frantically. The gallery alternated between supportive murmurs and angry outbursts. Finally, Blackwood called for a recess. This committee will deliberate and vote tomorrow morning. Witnesses are dismissed. They stumbled out of the chamber exhausted. Stowe met them in the hall, beaming. That was incredible. Better than I hoped. If we get even half of them to vote yes, will we? Evelyn asked. I don't know, but you gave them every reason to. Now we wait. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in the hotel bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every question, wondering if they'd done enough. Around midnight, Clara crawled into bed beside her. Then Ruth. Then May. They hadn't slept together like this since their first night at Twin Pines. Just held each other, 4 sisters who'd survived everything together. Did we do it? Ruth whispered. Did we convince them? I don't know, Evelyn admitted. What happens if we didn't? We keep fighting. Find another way. We don't stop. I'm tired of fighting, Claire said quietly. I just want to go home. Me too. But we can't. Not yet. No, not yet. May didn't say anything, just held on tighter. Morning came gray and cold. They returned to the Capitol for the vote. The chamber was even more packed than before. Word had spread. People wanted to see the outcome. They took their seats and waited. Blackwood entered and called the session to order. The committee has deliberated on the proposed Child Protection Act. We will now vote. All in favor? Hands went up. Evelyn counted frantically. 5, 6, 7. All opposed? More hands. 8, 9, 10. She couldn't tell. Couldn't tell if they had enough. Blackwood counted. The vote is 9 in favor, 11 opposed. The measure fails. The words hit like a punch. They lost. After everything, the testimony, the tour, the months of work, they lost. Evelyn felt Clara's hand slip into hers, felt Ruth's shoulder shaking, heard May's small sob. They'd failed. But Blackwood wasn't finished. However, several members have expressed interest in modified legislation addressing specific abuses. We will form a subcommittee to draft alternative proposals. This matter is not closed. It wasn't what they wanted, but it was something. A crack in the wall. Outside reporters swarmed them. Stowe deflected most questions, but one journalist got through. Miss Whitaker, how do you feel about losing the vote? Evelyn wanted to scream, wanted to cry, wanted to give up. But she looked at her sisters, at Caleb standing behind them, at all the people who'd supported them, and found something else. We didn't lose, she said. We made them vote, made them look at what they've been ignoring, made them uncomfortable enough to promise reform. That's not losing. That's the start of winning. But the legislation failed today. It failed today. Tomorrow, we try again. And the day after that, and the day after that, until it passes. The journalist wrote that down. How long are you willing to fight? As long as it takes. They didn't go straight home. Stowe convinced them to do 2 more speaking events, Baltimore and Philadelphia. The crowds were bigger than before, energized by the congressional hearing. People were angry now, angry at the vote, angry at the system, angry enough to demand change. In Philadelphia, 3 congressmen who'd voted against the legislation showed up to explain their positions. The crowd booed them off the stage. It wasn't Congress changing its mind. It was the people forcing Congress to reconsider. By the time they returned to Kansas in late February, something had shifted. Letters poured in from across the country. Donations to reform organizations tripled. State legislatures started introducing their own child protection bills. It wasn't the sweeping federal reform they'd wanted, but it was movement. Twin Pines looked exactly the same. The ranch had survived without them. Madam Lynn had kept everything running, the horses were healthy, the books were balanced. It was like they'd never left except they'd changed completely. That first night back, they gathered in the main room like they used to. Caleb made coffee. Madam Lynn brought out food. They sat together in comfortable silence. What now? Ruth finally asked. Now we live, Caleb said. We work. We heal. We let other people carry the fight for a while. But the legislation didn't pass. Not yet. Might take years, might not happen until you're grown and fighting it yourselves. But you started something. That's enough for now. Evelyn wasn't sure it was enough, but she was too tired to argue. Spring came. They settled back into ranch routine. Evelyn managed finances. Ruth handled inventory. Clara cooked and played piano when she had time. May worked with the horses. But word about them had spread. Other families started showing up, people with children they couldn't care for, asking if the ranch would take them in. Caleb said yes more often than he said no. By summer, there were 8 children at Twin Pines. By fall, 12. It wasn't an orphanage. It was something else. A working ranch where kids learned real skills, earned real wages, built real lives. Other ranchers started copying the model. A network formed, quietly, of places that would take in children and treat them like people. The legal battles continued. Kansas passed a modified child protection law in 1889. Other states followed slowly. Each victory was small, partial, incomplete, but they were victories. Years passed. Evelyn turned 18 and officially became an adult. Caleb offered her a full partnership in the ranch. She accepted. Claire got a scholarship to a music conservatory in Chicago, came back summers to teach piano to the younger kids. Ruth went to university to study engineering, became one of the first women in the field, revolutionized agricultural systems across the Midwest. May never left the ranch, stayed to work with animals, developed a reputation as someone who could heal anything. By 25, she was the most respected equine veterinarian in 3 states. Caleb lived to see all of it, watched the girls grow into women, watched Twin Pines become a sanctuary for dozens of children, watched the system they'd challenged slowly, painfully change. He died in winter of 1903, 16 years after buying 4 girls at an auction. He was surrounded by family, not blood family, but chosen family. Evelyn held his hand at the end. "Did we do it?" he asked. His voice was weak, but his grip was still strong. "Did we change anything?" "Yes," she told him. "We changed everything." It wasn't exactly true. The fight wasn't over. Children were still exploited, still hurt, still forgotten. But it was less than before, and the momentum they'd created kept building. In 1912, Evelyn was invited to testify before Congress again, this time for the Federal Child Labor Act. She was 39 years old, a successful businesswoman, a respected advocate. She stood in the same chamber where she'd testified as a 16-year-old girl and told the story again. 25 years ago, she began, my sisters and I were sold at an auction in Kansas. A man named Caleb Mercer bought us, saved us, gave us a chance to become who we are today. He's gone now. But what he started isn't. Every child who's been protected by reform legislation in the past 2 decades owes him something, owes all of us something. This act would extend those protections federally, would ensure no child anywhere is ever sold or exploited. I'm asking you to finish what we started. This time, the vote wasn't close. The act passed overwhelmingly. Evelyn stood outside the Capitol afterward, Clara beside her, Ruth on her phone coordinating with engineers in Kansas, May back at the ranch managing 30 horses and twice as many children. They'd all built lives far beyond what anyone expected for orphan girls from nowhere. "Think he's watching?" Clara asked quietly. Evelyn thought about Caleb, about the angry, broken rancher who'd seen something wrong and decided to do something about it, about the man who'd chosen them even when it cost everything. "Yeah," she said, "I think he is." Twin Pines continued for decades, became a model for foster programs across the country. Hundreds of children passed through, learning to survive and then learning to thrive. They carried the story forward, the story of 4 sisters and the rancher who refused to look away. Evelyn ran the ranch until she was 60, then passed it to the next generation of children they'd raised. She wrote a memoir about everything that happened, published in 1920. It became required reading in schools, taught people about a time when children could be bought and sold, about the people who fought to change it. She died in 1935, 82 years old, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, none related by blood, all connected by choice and courage. Her funeral was attended by hundreds, former orphans who'd found homes, legislators who'd passed reform bills, ordinary people whose lives had been changed by a story about 4 girls and an angry rancher. At the end, May stood up to speak. She was 64, gray-haired, still working with horses, still healing broken things. My sister used to say we survived because we stayed together, May said. But it was more than that. We survived because someone got angry enough to help. Because one person decided watching wasn't enough. Because Caleb Mercer taught us that the world only changes when people refuse to accept how it is. She paused, looking out at the crowd. Evelyn's gone now. Caleb's been gone 30 years. But what they started keeps going. Every law protecting children, every person who sees injustice and acts, every time someone chooses courage over comfort, that's their legacy. That's all our legacy. The story could have ended there, but it didn't, because stories like this don't end. They ripple forward, touching lives decades and centuries later. The ranch still stands in Kansas, still taking in children who need somewhere to heal. The laws they fought for have been expanded, strengthened, made permanent, and sometimes when the wind blows across the prairie, you can almost hear them. 4 sisters and the rancher who saved them, angry at injustice, refusing to give up, changing the world one fight at a time. The lesson was simple, but hard. One person can't fix everything. But one person who's angry enough, brave enough, stubborn enough to act can start something that grows beyond them, can plant seeds that bloom long after they're gone. Caleb Mercer didn't set out to change the world. He just couldn't stand to watch 4 girls be destroyed. That single moment of fury, that refusal to look away, cascaded into decades of reform that protected thousands of children. He wasn't perfect. He was broken, grief-stricken, barely holding his own life together. But he chose to care when everyone else chose comfort. And that choice mattered more than perfection ever could. The Whitaker sisters weren't heroes. They were survivors forced to become advocates, children thrust into battles they never asked for. They were scared, angry, imperfect, human, but they fought anyway, told their story anyway, refused to let their suffering be meaningless. And together, a broken rancher and 4 orphaned girls, they proved that sometimes the smallest acts of courage grow into the biggest changes. That anger at injustice isn't a character flaw. It's fuel. It's what keeps you fighting when reason says to quit. The world didn't change because of grand plans or perfect people. It changed because a few imperfect people got angry enough to act, and kept acting, and refused to stop until something broke in the system they were fighting. That's not a comfortable lesson. It's exhausting. It means every person who sees injustice carries the weight of deciding whether to act. It means comfortable silence is a choice with consequences. It means we're all responsible for the world we inherit and the one we leave behind. But it's also hopeful. Because if one angry rancher and 4 orphaned girls could start a revolution that protected thousands, then anyone can. Every person who refuses to look away matters. Every act of courage counts. Every choice to protect the vulnerable adds up. The auction block is gone now. The system that allowed it has been dismantled, rebuilt, improved. Not perfect, never perfect, but better. And that improvement was bought with the anger and courage and stubborn refusal to quit of people whose names most will never know. Caleb Mercer's name is known. Carved on a monument at Twin Pines Ranch, written in history books, taught in schools. But the real monument is the children who survived because he cared, the laws that protect them, the world that's slightly less cruel because he got angry at the right moment. And the question the story leaves is simple but demanding. What will you do when you see injustice? Will you watch, or will you be angry enough to act? Because the world is still full of auction blocks. They just look different now. And they're still waiting for people angry enough, brave enough, stubborn enough to tear them down.